this is going to go into your business plan, but I want you to think about ahead of time before you start collecting records, or even if you have started collecting records. Think about the records that you are keeping, how often you are keeping them, who are you keeping them to present to. What are you going to do with these records? First and foremost, write them down. I don't care whether it's a notebook or an electronic spreadsheet, but these need to be committed to paper, virtually or really. So I want to start our discussion of records by thinking about the three places, or the three kinds of records that we'll be keeping, or the three kinds of records that we'll talk about. You'll have records about the market itself, and we'll get into these in a little more detail. You'll have records about the farmers and or the vendors, so that would be the second group. And then you would probably have some records about the consumers or the visitors or the patrons, or however you want to classify that. So let's talk about the records for the market. And these would be some things that are essential for you to keep in one place and keep as an ongoing or a running list. Certainly you'd like to have the year it's opened, and you probably don't need to collect that more than once, but that needs to go into some sort of permanent record. The physical location of the market, and you might want to describe this as a street address or between streets or some physical place. You might also want to think about the size or the square footage or some other parameter that helps you define more precisely what that location is. So kind of physically, if it had a mailing address, or if you were going to put that into a GPS, what would that be? And then some sort of area. The next couple of records that you're going to keep are going to be kind of running records. Ideally, I would have you collect this on a daily basis, on some sort of a calendar, because I think this will be a good place for you to record these measures. The weeks that you're in operation, certainly if you take daily records, that is pretty easy to see. But if you're a fall only, or a little bit of a late summer into fall, what are the weeks of operation each year? What are the days of the week that you're in operation? Is it only Thursdays? Is it Wednesday evening and Saturday morning? Kind of what are the days of the week that you are in operation for that calendar year? And then after you're looking at the days, the hours in operation. Kind of another running total I'd like you to think about on the side is the number of hours that you were open that week. I think we're going to find, and again I get this from Covey, the week is a very convenient place to do some summaries because you don't necessarily do everything every day. But collecting data daily and then summarizing that at the end of the week kind of gives you a place that you can look at 52 pieces of information or 52 items. Do you get what I'm trying to have you do there? So you might have the days and the hours that you were open, but at that 8th column, you're going to have the total number of hours that you were open, and then maybe 2 days for 7 or 8 hours, whatever that running total is. So collect it daily, but kind of keep that running total as a week. Time of day, I think, is also important, particularly as you start to look at traffic and number of people and vendors. So you, in addition to the hours that you're in operation, if you're open for 3 or 4 hours, you should note what those hours of operation are, starting and ending. Okay? Some other records that pertain to the operation of the market would be the sales, ideally the gross sales for vendors. Again, in a wonderful world, we could get this on a daily basis, but I think weekly we might be pushed to, that is really the best that we can get. The number of stalls or vendors that we had in that particular week, again, should be in that kind of running total that we're looking at each week. So if we're open 2 days a week, let's say Wednesday afternoon and Saturday morning, we might have some vendors that are there Saturday only. So we would want to count how many stalls we had Wednesday and how many we had Saturday, how many were unique.
Would you recommend something like a diary or is there a convenient way, do you think, for?
A calendar is probably the best place to start. And if you can do this on an electronic calendar, I think it's going to help you you're not just creating this record for yourself. You're creating this for somebody 5 years or maybe even 10 years from now to take a look at and say, oh, they tried Wednesday night and it didn't work. They tried Wednesday night here and it didn't work, but they tried Wednesday night again 2 years later and it worked. So that's why I want you to think about the calendar and electronic, because that might give you a better record. The paper won't get lost. Or keeping weather notations, particularly significant weather events, frost, very hot, pouring down rain, that's a little bit harder to quantify, but nonetheless should be noted. And then, of course, we're going to have years like this year where everything was 2 weeks early. We're going to have years like a year or two ago where everything was a week or two late. So we know these are going to be kind of moving targets. Again, that's why that week is kind of a nice thing to have. This is a vital piece of information. This is a vital piece of information for a lot of people for a lot of reasons, isn't it? But it's a lot like asking me how old I am or how much do I weigh. I'm really reluctant to tell you that, okay? It's not just something I want to wear on my name tag. Now, and I'm going to ask you guys for a little bit of input here, but if we can put this as an issue that helps to make the market successful, vendor, we need a category, we need a rounded figure, we need a highly conservative estimate for what you did, because here is how we use that number. I am not going to use that number to tax you. I am not going to use that number to penalize you. I need this number to provide evidence for the market's growth, to the board if I have such a board. I need to have a good figure that helps to reflect the total robustness of this market. Now, can we collect that anonymously? It gets a little bit difficult because if people forget. Any of you had stories, and again, I'm going to tell you, make the number the bad guy. Give them a range, give them a way that they can give this information to you that you maybe don't necessarily know who that is individually, but we've got to collect that information.
I have a sheet of paper with all the vendors for that day. It has, and they have a place that they can put a check mark. And then they go behind the trailer, and they can take a piece of paper, write it on there, put it in the can, put a check mark. Then I can see who hasn't done it, and I can remind them. And it's been 4 years in coming, but it's been really hard. But now I can say, you know, that our market did $120,000 last year. And how can I make it better for you if I don't know?
Right, and so that's the thing. We have to underscore the importance of this number. I don't need this number. We need this number. Erica.
We have a vendor, like plastic folders, and each vendor has a folder, and we just keep it. So if they don't come that week, it's just in our box that we bring, and we give it to them at the beginning of the day, and we get it back at the end of the day. And I think that's a nice way. You know, they don't have to post it in front of someone else if they don't want to, but we get it back. And I think when we're talking about why do we need the information, we always talk about potential funding for the future. We also kind of see, not vendors as clients at all, but we want to be supporting vendors. It's not just to bring fresh food to customers, but it's right to help the vendors make more money, and that's a living for them. So we kind of phrase it in that way. If you share this with us, we can try to leverage more support.
Excellent. So that anonymity helps.
One of the problems I found is that the farmer and myself, I do not want to count my money at the end of the day. I want to go home. Oh. So what I've done is that for the first week we just eliminate it, and we start the second week. And so what was your sales last week? They know. I know exactly what my number was last week when I'm going into Sunday market, and I go, what was last week's, and that helps them so you don't have to count that money right now.
So, a couple of things that we've learned. You can make it anonymous. You need to make it easy. How do you make it easy? Providing them with the place, the way, when it is convenient for them. So, when we talk about surveying and information that you can get, this is something that you can ask your farmer vendors. How do I make it easy for you to record this important piece of information that we need to make this market successful? If I try this, would you be willing to try this? Let's try a couple of things. Okay, go ahead, question then, James.
There's nothing you can do, it's just, you just bypass it. Yep. I don't count it.
Well, and you might try some other mechanism for collecting that from folks that don't come every week. Maybe they can report once a month for that. Because often you don't have to act on that number immediately, but if you could collect that once a month. Well, I'm gonna encourage you to really try to work hard to get that real number as accurately as you can, because we cannot calculate average sale per vendor. And that is something that you can use as a recruiting tool. I think this is, I'm such, Drew will tell you, Amanda will tell you, I'm a data pig number geek. I want to have that real number as close as I possibly can. And we can't do some other calculations without it. So even if you start off with categories to try to say, was it 0 to 500, 500 to 1,000, or whatever are meaningful categories for you, somehow make that number something that's important to them and collect that as painlessly and anonymously as you possibly can with some accountability. You can put it in the rules and regs, but then you've got to think about accountability. Okay, let's move on to some of the others, because this is where the sales, the number of stalls, I just said it a minute ago about average vendor sales. I think that's a very helpful thing for you to consider. You might want to break it down even further. If somebody has a processed product, the popcorn vendor is going to make more or less than the cider vendor. So you're going to have a little bit of differences there. You might want to break that down by some classification if you have that: fresh produce marketer, processed product marketer, something to that effect.
Well, that became, now you almost kind of change it with a category like that into a personal, now they kind of changed that to a personal thing there, versus an overall.
But I'm collecting anonymously and reporting aggregately. Let's say you have no one, or maybe you only have 3 stalls that are marketing processed products. That revenue for the processed product vendor might be higher on average than the fresh produce marketer. Does that make sense? So when we average those 2 categories together, you kind of lose some detail, some clarity. It's something that could be done, but absolutely those weekly sales. Absolutely. Yes?
In going after some of the grant monies that are out there, that's where that's going to come into play.
Oh, yeah. Fundraising, grants, reporting to people who you want to contribute. This is where you really need to underscore that to your vendors, how important that is, because here are the ways. We might not need that number today, but we're going to need that for sure. At some point, somebody's going to need that in the future. Gotta get that number. Total vendor stalls, and then maybe average vendor count. How many vendors do you have on average per market day, if you permit fluctuations there. Another piece on the record counting for the market side would be how many pounds of food are donated to food banks weekly. You're going to have to think about a mechanism. How is that food distributed to the food bank? Are you doing that, or are a couple of your farmer vendors doing that? And what kind of aggregate number can you get from them? So make it easy again to get that type of information reported. And then accumulate the food that's been donated during the season. Why is this donation to the food bank important?
Shows community care.
Community cares, community support. There's value to that produce. Sponsorship, absolutely. And then any food assistance statistics, again, these might be a little bit easier for you to aggregate, but certainly think about collecting how much food or dollars of product that were given with food assistance programs. Kind of another chunk of records to be keeping for the market itself have to do with the volunteers. You need to get, and again, make this easy for them, how many volunteers you had, how many volunteer hours that you had per week. how many volunteer hours you had over that entire season. You can do some calculations from that, average volunteer hours per week or average volunteer hours per season. You also want to think about if you're giving nonprofits some space, this has value. You need to capture how much of this value that you're giving away. So if you're donating 1 or 2 stalls to nonprofits per week, or maybe for a set number of weeks, you need to capture the value of that and how long those nonprofits exhibited or displayed in that particular stall. What else would you add to this list? We're not yet to customers. We are not yet to vendors. But what else would you add to this list? Start with you guys?
Well, I think that even with the record keeping, your relationship with your vendors depends on what they will tell you and how they can react to. Because like the health department wanted some information, and they were going to ask, but they didn't feel comfortable asking them, so they asked me to ask them. So
okay.
some of the things that they think the vendors would offend to, but if you have a relationship with them, they'll talk about it.
Yeah, did you all hear Yvonne's comment?
No.
She talked about the importance of the relationship and being able to get this information from the vendors. And I'll bring another book to your attention. Can you tell I read a lot? The Speed of Trust. It's actually Stephen Covey's son. And I don't know if you've ever thought about it before, but in a high trust environment, it costs less and takes less time to get things done. But we've all worked in low trust environments where people are micromanaging you, and how much time and money does it cost to get things done in a low trust environment? Yeah, we need to really work on building that high trust environment.